Well, good morning, everyone. It sounds like oral arguments are quickly wrapping up, but while we're all on the phone or Zoom together, I say, let's get this off and running. So we're very pleased to have you here this morning. Families USA and the National Health Law Program are excited to have this opportunity to talk to members of the media about the importance of the ACA and Medicaid and what it means to people across this nation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to NHeLP's Executive Director, Elizabeth Taylor.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everybody. I'm really pleased to be joining Frederick Isasi today for this conversation. I'm going to make a few remarks, Frederick's going to make a few remarks, and then we'll have some opportunity for questions. I want to start by putting today's argument in the context of what's happening to the health of our country. Health disparities have been apparent in this country since long before the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, women of color in this country are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related issues than white women. 42% of African Americans suffer from hypertension compared to 28% of whites. What's happening in this pandemic is that those health disparities are becoming more apparent, and they're also getting worse. People of color are more likely to be infected because they're more likely to be in jobs that put them at risk. But even among people who are infected, the hospitalization and mortality rates for people of color are higher than the rates for white people. There are multiple reasons for these health disparities, including the stress of living as a person of color in this country. But unequal access to health care is a significant contributor to those health disparities. Combined with other inequalities like income inequality and housing inequality, unequal access to health care perpetuates the legacy of racism in this country. We should be ashamed and we should do better. The ACA was a step in the right direction, and this would be the wrong time to go backwards. More than 20 million people would lose health care if the entire ACA were struck down. Medicaid expansion alone has brought more than 13 million people into the ranks of the insured, and the tax credits for purchasing insurance on the ACA exchanges add another 10 million low-income people who have access to regular health care, many for the first time. The need for ACA coverage is going to continue to increase as people lose their jobs and their health insurance. In Medicaid expansion states, the ACA will provide financial assistance to anywhere from 65 to 75% of the people who lose their jobs because of the pandemic. The ACA's pre-existing condition protections will keep the millions of Americans who have or may become infected by COVID from being denied coverage or having their benefits capped. The ACA's non-discrimination requirements, properly interpreted and enforced, mean that access to medical resources can't be denied to someone who is LGBTQ or has limited English proficiency, to women who have used reproductive health care, or to a person with disabilities. The ACA strengthened our public health infrastructure, which Congress has built on to provide COVID testing to everybody across the country. And the ACA funded initiatives like telehealth that promise access to healthcare in rural communities, in addition to making healthcare access possible during the pandemic. Continuing efforts to destroy the ACA through litigation. Sorry, I'm getting a call I'm trying to get rid of. Continuing efforts to destroy the ACA through litigation, like the case that was just argued, and through administration policies, like the efforts to knock people off Medicaid rolls with work requirements and premiums that low-income people can't afford, things that we've been fighting in court, or the wrong direction. It's time for our country to catch up with the rest of the world and make access to essential healthcare a given. It's the right thing to do for our country, and it will make our country stronger, better, and more equitable. So I am really pleased now to turn this mic over to Frederick.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to your talented staff at NHeLP for convening this briefing. We love our partnership with you and your staff. We've worked closely with NHeLP for decades, and we're proud to stand with you now to explain the context and the potential consequences of the litigation before the Supreme Court today. Let me say this loud and clear as Executive Director of Families USA, as a healthcare lawyer, as a staff member on Senate Finance and Health, who was deeply involved in writing this law, and most importantly, based on the decades upon decades of case law and the Supreme Court's main decisions. This lawsuit is a very weak lawsuit. It was brought for purely political reasons by Texas and arch conservative attorneys general. If the Supreme Court strikes down any part of the Affordable Care Act based on this lawsuit, it will be making a purely political decision. Justices will be putting aside their responsibility to uphold the Constitution, and they will be colluding to use judicial activism to repeal a law that President Trump and a Republican-controlled Congress failed to repeal through legislative action. We all remember the moment when John McCain cast the deciding vote to uphold the law with a very clear thumbs down. If the court overrides this, they will be inflicting permanent and deep damage to the reputation of the Supreme Court and the trust Americans have in the court and the checks and balances created by the framers of our Constitution. As Elizabeth said, the Affordable Care Act is about one thing: making sure that no one in this country ever has to worry that they can't afford health care or they have to choose between filling a prescription and paying their rent or mortgage, period. Every person in our nation deserves that. The ACA banned all the terrible tricks that insurance companies have been playing. It protects people with pre-existing conditions. It works hard to make sure that healthcare is affordable. It allows parents to keep their kids on health insurance while in college or during their early working years. The Affordable Care Act strengthened the Medicare program and eliminated billions of dollars of costs for seniors for prescription drugs. It strengthened healthcare for children and new moms. The law even created a pathway to ensure that expensive biologic drugs could be made and sold in a much more affordable way. As Elizabeth said, the Affordable Care Act allows over 20 million people to secure high quality health insurance, and it protects about 135 million more with pre-existing conditions from insurance discrimination. And despite the political rhetoric, the law is popular. Families want to build upon those protections rather than seeing them dismantled. In fact, a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll indicates that a solid majority, 60% of people in our nation, do not want the Supreme Court to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And majorities from each party favor maintaining protections for people with pre-existing conditions, the bedrock of the Affordable Care Act. And as we sit here today and hear oral arguments, it's all in the context of a worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. The dynamic between access to affordable healthcare and economic security has never been clearer. Elizabeth provided some really important statistics. 5.4 million laid off workers became uninsured between February and May of this year because of the pandemic. Without the ACA and Medicaid and private health insurance provisions, the number of uninsured Americans would be much, much higher. And let's remember, 10 million people have already been infected with this terrible virus, and infections are increasing at a terrifying rate. The Affordable Care Act is a critical weapon to protect families from the virus and to protect families' financing during one of the worst economic downturns our nation has ever faced. Think about what it would mean if the Supreme Court overturns this ACA in this case, and millions upon millions of families that have been infected by this virus would forever be subject to discriminations based on pre-existing conditions. Each of these people infected by this terrible virus could be denied coverage altogether, charged more for health insurance, or even denied benefits that treat any lasting effects of disease. Above all, we hope the justices on this court will do the right thing and toss out this weak and damaging lawsuit. If not, the court will be engaging in a purely political act of judicial activism and forever damaging its own reputation and the trust that we all have in the fundamental checks and balances of our society. In just a few minutes, we will be hearing from some of our terrific storytellers, people like our families, our neighbors, who can underscore how important healthcare reform has been for their families, and what's at stake for people around this country in the Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court case. You'll hear from Peter Morley, Paul Gibbs, Savanna Braun, Stephanie Burton, Ragan Grossman, and Steve Venick. Before we hear from our storytellers, we're going to take a few questions, so I'll turn it back over to Andy.
Sorry, it's too late in this not to unmute myself. Anyway, yes, we would love to take questions from members of the media. If you can either put your questions in the Q&A area at the bottom or just the chat, but the Q&A is probably best. We will direct your questions to Frederick and Elizabeth. No reason to be overly shy. I think from just jumping in to start the conversation, oh, here we go. Never mind, we have some questions. So a question from Debbie Yetter. What was the sense of how the arguments went today for anyone who didn't have a chance to listen to them? I open that up to both Frederick and Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first and just say, and then I'll turn it to you. I listened to the argument. There was a lot about standing. And I don't read tea leaves, and so I'm not going to predict how the court is going to rule. I was encouraged by the questions from all of the justices, really pushing on the standing question. I thought that both the California Solicitor General and Don Verrilli, our former United States Solicitor General, made a very strong case both on the absence of standing and on the fact that the NFIB court made clear that the Section 5000A, which is the individual mandate, was not a command, but it was a choice. And that is the right way to read what Congress in 2017 did, because Congress in 2017 was building on the authoritative interpretation of the statute by the Supreme Court. And so, and there's nothing in the 2017 statute that suggests that Congress was trying to reinstitute a command that the Supreme Court had said would be unconstitutional. And I thought that got a lot of resonance with the court. There wasn't a lot of conversation about severability, but Justice Kavanaugh specifically said to Texas, you would have a very hard case to make to ask us to strike down the entirety of this statute when our precedents argue for severing a statute if it's possible. So I was encouraged by the questions. I thought that the advocates did a very strong job. And Frederick, what do you think?
I think you just described it beautifully, Elizabeth. There's not much I can improve upon there. I think that this question of standing in both cases, I think what we kept hearing was that the justices themselves are in a pretty clear box. There's such strong case law when it comes to standing, and there's such strong case law when it comes to severability. And I think there was a lot of discussion about, is there any way for us to distinguish this? Hypotheticals about what if Americans were required to cut their grass and other things like that. But really, it seems like there was almost an acknowledgement in the questions that the case law here is very strong. And so, for example, it's hard to understand what the damage is that people are experiencing by a mandate that's been zeroed out. You know, there was a question about whether or not if you were applying for a job, and as Texas has a hypothetical in their arguments, and somebody asked, have you broken the law? Would you have to say yes if you didn't get health insurance if this mandate was upheld? You know, very kind of odd and very far-fetched hypotheticals. And then when it comes to the actual question of severability, it was even stronger, I think, as Elizabeth was saying, you know, that the justices, including conservative justices like Kavanaugh, were saying, you know, at the heart of the constitutional question the court's trying to answer, they're trying to protect the legislative authority of Congress. And so if they are not narrow in their interpretation, and if they don't just strike down the portion of the law that they might find objectionable, that's a very extreme form of judicial activism. They're actually striking the entire ability of Congress to write laws. And so they try to interpret this very narrowly. So even if the plaintiffs get far enough, they actually get past standing, which I think was cast in doubt today. The notion that the court couldn't just simply say, well, the individual mandate in the law is no longer in effect, everything else stands, seems hard to imagine. And that's why I think in my opening statement, if we see the court go any further than that, it's a really sad moment. And, you know, it was quite a moment for the country when Senator McCain put his thumb down and said, we are not repealing the Affordable Care Act. It would be quite a travesty for the Supreme Court to get anywhere near that in this decision.
Then we had another question about the Medicaid expansion, and I think we've talked a bit about that with severability, but would you all talk just a little bit about the impact that, you know, Medicaid expansion has had on states that have, you know, decided to expand it over the last 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And Medicaid expansion is an enormously significant part of the ACA. You know, as we all remember, it was made optional by the court in NFIB, but 36 states and the District of Columbia have accepted Medicaid expansion. And in those states, the data are already showing the impact that Medicaid expansion is having on the people of those states. The uninsured rates are going way down, you know, and we'll increasingly see the impact on the health of people in those states to have the 13 million people now covered by insurance who haven't been covered in the past. There would be an enormous impact on Medicaid expansion in the states if the ACA were struck down. You know, it's possible that states could find ways to continue to legally continue to insure those populations, but they would not have the federal funding to do it. The federal funding is a 90% match for the Medicaid expansion population. And so the loss of that federal infusion of funding would make it very, very hard for states to continue to care for the people in their states. You know, the federal money that flows into states through the Medicaid program has a huge impact on state budgets and the healthcare industries in those states. And so, you know, the impact of trying to turn back the clock on this would cause harm to the state budgets, to the individuals in the states, to the healthcare providers who would all of a sudden be seeing huge upticks in uncompensated care. So, you know, you cannot overestimate the impact that a bad decision would have. And, you know, particularly focused on Medicaid expansion, the National Health Law Program wrote a brief focused specifically on the severability of the Medicaid expansion because it matters so much. And it's worth looking at that brief because we really trace the history of Medicaid and the way that it's been expanded and expanded by Congress over the years, sometimes in ways that were tacked on to other legislation, you know, as this was tacked onto the ACA, but that clearly should be severable. And we sure hope that, we hope that the court doesn't have to get to that, but that if they do, that they make clear that Medicaid expansion, it will stand.
Totally agree, Elizabeth, beautifully said. And, you know, I remember when we were actually negotiating the Medicaid expansion in the Senate Finance Committee in the Gang of Six, that bipartisan group, I was asked to sort of provide a framework and sort of lay out the pros and cons of Medicaid expansion to that bipartisan group of senators. And, you know, fundamentally, what a lot of the folks out there don't remember is that before the Affordable Care Act was enacted, people believed, in fact, a lot of the senators in that room believed if you were poor enough, you got Medicaid, but that wasn't the case. That was not the case. You had to be poor and something else. You'd be poor and, say, a pregnant woman, poor and elderly, poor and a child. And there were many, many people who were left out, which meant you could be incredibly, you could have no resources. You could be living on the street and you had no way to get health insurance and care. And so that's what the Medicaid provisions the ACA did. It allowed for folks who are really struggling to have a way to get healthcare. It also allows for a payment to go into the healthcare system, so we didn't have this terrible problem of cross-subsidization, all those sorts of things. And I remember watching these, you know, very smart, very well-informed senators get confused about whether or not, if you were poor enough, you had Medicaid, you could get Medicaid, right? And that's really what this is about. And it's really hard to imagine what the individual mandate, the purpose of the mandate is to make sure that there's enough folks participating in the private health insurance so that it's a healthy market and the cost of insurance is reasonable. What we found out was without a mandate, we don't need the mandate for that to happen, right? But that was the original argument for the mandate. And it has nothing to do whatsoever with eligibility for or people's access to Medicaid. So this notion that somehow the two things would have to ride together is a very weak legal argument.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, the Medicaid expansion is proving to be so important right now during the COVID pandemic. That's how people who are losing their employer-sponsored healthcare are getting covered now. And so it's tremendously important during the pandemic. It's been tremendously important as we have battled substance use problems. The Medicaid expansion is the source of a lot of the care for substance use disorder. So the foresight of the 2010 Congress in expanding Medicaid, as Frederick said, to low-income people who, many of whom just had no access to regular health care. You know, and so the problem is that the providers, like hospitals, had to cover people who showed up on their doorstep with emergency problems. And that's a problem with uncompensated care. But the real problem is people living without regular health care. And that just takes such a toll on health, the health of our country and our the strength of our nation. We can't be a strong nation if we aren't providing health care to our people.
Well, Elizabeth and Frederick, thank you so much for answering questions, for speaking with us this morning, you know, about the impact of the ACA. At this point, we are going to, if there's no further questions, we're going to turn it over to Kimberly, who is going to moderate our panelist roundtable with our ACA storytellers. So thank you both for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. It was nice to be here. Frederick, always fun to be with you.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. Talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, Andy, and hello, everyone. Well, today is the day. The Supreme Court of the United States this morning heard oral arguments about the validity of the healthcare law. This is the 7th time in 8 years that the ACA has been challenged. In fact, the ACA is the most challenged statute in modern US history. So what's at stake? What happens if the entire ACA, the entire healthcare law is struck down? 23 million people will lose access to healthcare immediately. Access to healthcare for 135 people with pre-existing conditions is at stake. And by the way, COVID-19 could be deemed a pre-existing condition at some point. A little bit more about people with pre-existing conditions. And these are conditions like diabetes and hypertension, like we just heard Elizabeth from NHeLP discuss, arthritis, lupus. These people would no longer be able to obtain health insurance at will, or either they would be charged at exorbitant amounts for very limited coverage. So that's at stake. 12 million people who are newly covered by Medicaid expansion, and that's Medicaid expansion in 36 states that have adopted and implemented expansion. I think Oklahoma and Missouri have adopted, but not yet implemented. So invalidating the healthcare law would take away access to care for all those people, all 12 million. It would also affect eligibility rules. And every dimension of our healthcare system will be affected. That's Medicare, as I said, Medicaid, and hospitals. In particular, hospitals' payment structures would be upended. So ultimately, the entire healthcare sector would be affected. And this is a sector that comprises 18% of the US economy, according to a recent analysis by the Brookings Institute. So, and we can't miss the economy connection. As we just heard on our press briefing, 5.4 million people have been laid off from their jobs and are now uninsured. They lost insurance, or ESI, between February and May of this year because of pandemic-related job losses. So we can't disconnect access to healthcare and financial security. Those two things go hand in hand. And all this while we're navigating our way through the most deadly pandemic in 100 years, a pandemic that has infected approximately 10 million people and taken the lives of approximately 239,000. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kimberly Aline, Senior Director of Communications at Families USA. Welcome to our chat with storytellers about the ACA. We are here to listen to these storytellers' experiences with the US healthcare system and how losing access to care through the ACA would affect them. So we're gonna hear from 6 very engaged and active consumers about how the ACA has affected their lives. Joining us today are Peter Morley from New York, Savanna Braun from Houston, Texas, Stephanie Burton from Gladstone, Missouri, Paul Gibbs from West Valley City, Utah, Steve Venick, Nashville, Tennessee, and Ragan Grossman from Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome to each of you. We appreciate you very much for being here to share your stories. I'm going to turn first to Stephanie Burton. Hi, Stephanie.
Okay, hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Hey, how are you? Good to see you again.
Same here, same here.
I know you've been in court all day, so thank you for making time.
Not a problem. This is too important to miss.
Indeed, indeed it is. So Stephanie, I just want to start with you telling us about who you are. You have such an interesting background, and more important, about your healthcare journey and what it's been like and how the ACA has affected that journey.
Sure, and I will try to be brief. Lawyers get a little long-winded.
I know.
Okay. Like you said, my name is Stephanie Burton. I live in the Kansas City metro area. I am a single mother of 4 children. I had healthcare up until about 2008 when I went to law school. I started law school in the middle of a recession. And when, you know, everybody thinks, oh, you're going to go to law school, you're going to make all this money. And I still haven't said it. Money, please come. I'm waiting for it. one of the things that I was so surprised about when I finished law school, I had, several degrees and I couldn't find work. I couldn't find a job. Much like now, where we're seeing a lot of people who are coming out of professional schools in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a global crisis, and can't find work. So I had to start my law firm right out of law school. And that meant I did not have any employer provided healthcare. And I have diabetes, I have asthma, I have narcolepsy, I have a host of pre-existing conditions. I attempted to buy healthcare prior to the Affordable Care Act, and they offered me some very substandard insurance with very high deductibles. To the
Sounds
tune
like
of,
junk insurance.
Yes, to the tune of about roughly $800 a month. And I could not afford that. There was absolutely no way that I could afford it. It was more than my mortgage. We were trying to stay afloat. I'm trying to keep 4 kids fed, and I simply couldn't afford it. And so there was a significant amount of time that I did not have insurance. I had insurance briefly in 2009 when I was pregnant with my youngest daughter, because the state provides you health insurance if you're pregnant. But Lord knows I didn't want to stay pregnant forever. But following that, I didn't have any coverage until the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah.
And so with that, I didn't take care of health issues. I couldn't get something as simple as a well woman exam. I couldn't get something as simple as metformin, something that every diabetic has to take. So I didn't have the coverage that I needed. When the Affordable Care Act came down, I qualified for a subsidy. I got insurance, PPO insurance, not junk. I got PPO insurance, and I got it for less than $100 a month.
Wow.
And I was so thoroughly relieved, because all of the things that I had been through prior to that, where I had been sick and not been able to go and get a doctor's appointment to get treated, where I would have to wait to the last minute where I'm near death to get to the ER to be seen. And so being able to have that coverage just took so much stress off of me as a mother, as an attorney who always has to stay on point, who always has to be on top of their game. It took that stress off of me to be able to have insurance, just to do something as simple as take care of me, just preventative care,
Right.
Just, maintenance, like getting an oil change on your car, just being able to have that preventative maintenance was everything.
So Stephanie, I wanted to ask you, so how long was the period of time between you, before you got the ACA? You went for a period when you didn't have any coverage at all. How long was that?
That was from September of 2009 through January of 2014.
My goodness. And you have asthma, you have narcolepsy, you have diabetes, you have hypertension. Did I miss one?
No, I think you got them all.
Okay. Tell me what that time period was like, particularly managing the diabetes. And as you said, we're not even talking about the maintenance, the well woman exams, and, just basic general care, preventative care. What was it like not having your meds for insulin, or I'm sorry, for diabetes?
So I didn't even realize how bad it was until I got the coverage. Because when I went in to see a primary care doctor and they had tested my A1C, it was at a 13, which is astronomically high. Normal is under 6.
Under 6, right.
And I was at a 13.1 when they finally tested me, when I was finally able to go back in and get treatment. And it took so much work to get that within normal range. To the point where they thought I was going to have to become insulin dependent, because it had been gone untreated for so long. I had became pregnant and I miscarried in December of 2012. And, when you go to emergency room and you have a miscarriage, they tell you follow up with your doctor. there was no follow-up.
Yeah.
I didn't have a doctor to follow up with. I have no idea to this day why I miscarried. I don't know if it was because my diabetes was so high. I don't know if it was because my blood pressure was so high, but I couldn't get any care to find out. So just not knowing. And there was a time where I had severe bronchitis. I couldn't breathe. And I couldn't even get an inhaler. I couldn't have an inhaler, a fast-acting inhaler to treat my asthma during that, nearly 5-year span.
It continues to strike me. So I made the point about the connection with financial security and health, but it's healthcare and it's financial security, but it's total health, right? And so if you don't have the two, you can't be totally well and a functioning member of society,
right,
when you're battling all of these issues.
And you have no way to even talk to anybody to get mental health care.
Yeah, that's a part of it as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, with my insurance now, I can go talk to someone if things are getting overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, you're a brave one. You've been in this fight. And so again, I'm really thankful that you're here. We're gonna move on to Peter Morley now from New York. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, friend? I
am so grateful to you for mentioning lupus, and I'm
of course
for I suffer from lupus.
Mm-hmm.
It's never mentioned enough. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well, I have a special interest in lupus, as you know, so I always throw it in when I can. So I want to ask you, so you're obviously a huge healthcare advocate. You've been on the Hill talking to Congress several times, testifying, sharing your story. But for the people who are listening in and are not familiar with your story, please tell us a little bit about your healthcare journey and what your advocacy has looked like.
Well, I will try to do it as succinctly as possible, but I just think it's important to note in 1997, a long time ago, a galaxy far, far away, I was I had a lapse of insurance coverage. I was in between jobs, and I suffered a health crisis, and I had to have surgery, and I was considered a pre-existing condition, and all of my medical bills were denied. So I know what that experience is like. And then fast forward 10 years later, I became a person with disability from an accident. And fortunately, at that point, I had continuity of care. And, subsequent to that, I've had 10 surgeries in the last 13 years, 4 spinal surgeries. I was diagnosed with kidney cancer. And as we just spoke about, I was diagnosed with lupus and melanoma. I've had 2 brain surgeries for benign pituitary tumors. But the most important thing that I know about the ACA is it gives me access to my medications. It saves me, because I live on a fixed income, it saves me well over $1,000 a year, money which I do not have to pay for biologic injections, which I inject myself once a week, that would cost $120,000 a year. The ACA affords me that. And, I was very, very, very private. I know it's hard to believe this about me. As someone who has been to the Hill, I've met with GOP and Democratic members of Congress alike. And as you mentioned, I testified 3 times before 3 different House committees, but I was a very private person before 2016. But I realized and recognized that it was important for me to add my voice, to add my story, And then, you know, Frederick had mentioned about John McCain. Well, I was in John McCain's office on my first trip to DC, meeting with his staffer. I was in his office several hours before the thumbs down vote, speaking with his healthcare staffer about lupus in it. And fortuitously, somehow, I could never have planned this, her best friend had lupus.
Wow.
Gave her some contacts, information to give to her best friend. And, you know, I had to do everything in my power, and lupus it causes a great deal of fatigue, and it is not easy to make those trips to DC from New York City. You know, I put my health at great risk every time I travel. But after that first trip to DC, people started reaching out to me. I became a self-appointed patient advocate. People have called me a healthcare watchdog. I've amplified all the sabotage that the Trump administration has done to the Affordable Care Act. And I don't even have that much time to tell you everything that has been done, but there is a whole laundry list.
Yeah.
But it has become my life's work to protect the Affordable Care Act, to enhance it. And I see that as our road to universal coverage, because everybody deserves affordable, quality healthcare.
Indeed. And this movement, Peter, is so much better for you being in it. And thank you for your vulnerability and for being so open and transparent. You know, every time you speak out, be it via Twitter or Facebook, or you're testifying before a committee, it matters. So thank you. Thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you. And you know, I have to say this, and it's a very important thing. And I think I can speak for every patient that is here today. We did not ask to be chronically ill.
Amen. Amen to that double time. Let's move over to Houston, Texas, one of the states that's not taken Medicaid expansion. Savanna, Braun, you're in Houston, and you have an ACA story, primarily because of your age. So I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your healthcare journey and how the ACA has affected your life.
Yeah, so I'm 26 now, but at around the age of 3, I was diagnosed with severe asthma after a really bad asthma attack, and healthcare coverage was a little tricky back then, especially for a child. And my doctor and my parents worked together to sort of work around the system. And they diagnosed me with COPD and put that on there. And for some reason, that wasn't a pre-existing condition. So when my dad changed job, which, yeah, makes no sense at all. When my dad switched jobs, they wouldn't deny me care or coverage. So that was pretty interesting to sort of like navigate. And my dad also lost his job in 2004, I think, when like half of Austin was laid off. And so that was really hard because they had to pay for COBRA. And there was like no gap coverage that he really had. Like that was the only thing. And so we changed health insurances again. And so just trying to like navigate that while, you know, having a sick kid who really does like need the health insurance so that I didn't like die. That was pretty hard to deal with for my parents. And then around 14 years old, I developed a disease called psoriatic arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease that affects my joints, spine, eyes, liver, whole bunch of other stuff that comes with just a whole host of comorbidities. And so that's a lot more pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
And I need medication. So I have an infusion every 6 weeks, and that it's over $100,000 a year, I believe. So when I'm about to turn 26, I haven't been able to finish school because of chronic illness. And so I don't have a job that can cover health insurance. So my healthcare is in quite a bit of jeopardy especially while I'm waiting for the decision for the ACA. And so I don't know how that's going to come about, and like, how am I going to get healthcare if I don't have the ACA to protect me anymore, especially because I think it'll be decided in June and my 26th birthday is in July. So I won't have much time to figure out what the heck to do.
Yeah.
And so it's really terrifying to try and see if I can stay on my parents' health insurance because I'm sick, or if I can go to the marketplace. But if the marketplace doesn't exist anymore, how am I going to get health insurance? And so then I might have to go on Medicaid, and I don't necessarily have to go on Medicaid if I have the protections from the ACA. And so that saves the government money. So it's really confusing to me how this process is going about, because it literally is going to cost the government more money when, you know, they're trying to say like, this is fiscally unconservative and we're not saving money, but this is a lot about money and saving money. And same with like patients who have to go to the ER if they don't have coverage to do preventative care. Like, that's costing a lot more money too, when we could be covering preventative care. And same with like my asthma medications. You know, if I didn't have the biologic I have that costs $5,000-$6,000 a month, I would probably be in the hospital. I have the possibility of being intubated, and I may have to go on a cheap medication of that, and that would come with a whole other host of problems, while my arthritis and my asthma would be controlled. I could get osteopenia, have a lot of bones breaking, which costs a lot of money again. And I could get type 2 diabetes. And so it's really confusing to me that there are ways to avoid a lot of this, and that is through the ACA. You know, the ACA is not perfect. However, it is very good. And it does save the government a lot of money, and it can be built upon. So,
yeah, we agree with that. You know, it's not perfect, but it's a starting point. You know, it's a dot point, and we can certainly and improve and expand upon it. You know, you touched on something. You have not been able to finish school because of your myriad sicknesses. So that's a problem. And I heard the fear in your voice as you're thinking about what's going to happen. I think I've heard that SCOTUS may rule as early as May, or it could be June. But at any rate, in the meantime, your life is literally hanging in the balance, because what, you know, the ACA has done for people like you and the rest of you on our panel, it's protecting you from these prehistoric times and conditions where you could be denied coverage, or you were charged exorbitant amounts like Stephanie, and you're not getting the coverage you get is not really what you need. It's not sufficient. So I share your fear, because there are millions, 23 million people across the country who are going to lose access to care immediately. And then of course there's a 135 with pre-X conditions as well. So it's a scary time for sure. Yeah. Steve, I'm going to go over to you next because you also have a type of arthritis condition and you're coming to us from Nashville, Tennessee. So welcome, and please tell us a little bit about who you are and what your healthcare journey has been like with the ACA.
Hi, well, thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story, because I mean, basically the ACA, like a lot of people here, I think kind of it saved my life. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but that's kind of sounds to be the theme. I have a form of degenerative arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis, which affects the spinal column and other major joints. It's kind of in the same family, actually, as psoriatic arthritis.
Right.
Without treatment, my spinal column would fuse. Other joints, like my hip joints, would fuse. So I'd basically be, immobile in those ways. I started having issues when I was 12. Saw dozens of doctors, was taking pain meds every day. By age 20, I was down to 130 pounds. I'm almost 6 foot, 5'11". So I was super emaciated, to the point where doctors thought I maybe had like muscular dystrophy for a while. And then finally, they figured out I had this ankylosing spondylitis, and there was this new class of drugs. This was back in 2005. So these drugs were relatively new, the biologics that other folks have mentioned. I'm on one called Remicade. I get that infusion every 10 weeks. And it basically saved my life. I have been on it now for 15 years. Within 3 months of my first infusion, I had gained 35 pounds. I was back to a normal weight. I had no pain. I was able to walk, go up and down stairs, tie my shoes without, just extreme difficulty, put on pants in the morning. These things that we take for granted. But like other people have said, it's super expensive. It's between $25,000 and $35,000 a year. And so without the ACA, I wouldn't have been able, this all happened pre-ACA, and, this was 2005, I started getting my infusions, and then the insurance companies started denying the claims. I was a student at the time. I had health insurance. I'd always had health insurance. And I think, what sometimes get lost in this conversation is that, they didn't come out and say, you have a pre-existing condition, so we're not going to cover you. It was like, they wouldn't cover it. And then we'd ask why. And they would say, oh, well, they'd refer us to some kind of obscure thing. And then we'd go look at that obscure thing, and we filed an appeal. And then we'd ask for more information. And they just were giving us the runaround because there was no protection. So, they didn't say, you have a pre-existing condition, like, we're not going to cover it. They just stalled and delayed and denied. And honestly, the only way I was able to get my drug covered is because I'm extremely fortunate, and my father happens to be an attorney. Eventually, after getting, we filed an appeal. After getting the runaround for 9 months, we my father submitted a request, or kind of a firmly worded letter on his legal attorney letterhead. And wouldn't you know it, they decided to cover the drug, So this is what it was before the ACA, is that, people would just not get insurance companies would deny claims. And, how many people have an attorney as their father who can, take care of that? If I didn't have that, I don't know where I would be today. I mean, it's a degenerative disease. I was going downhill. So, I mean, it really, once the ACA happened and I knew that I had protections, it changed everything for me.
Every time I hear one of these stories, it takes my breath away, and it's also maddening at the same time. And you're so right. Like, who has an attorney in their family who can, fight for them on their behalf? Scores of people, even people who, feel relatively comfortable going up against an insurance company and filing an appeal. It's still intimidating, and it's scary. And again, it adds to the state of your overall health, including mental health.
I mean, it was difficult for my father. I have a memory of him. I was 20 at the time. I have a memory of him laying out all my EOBs, explanation of benefits, on our dining room table that we use like for Thanksgiving, the one that's like super big. So that like, and like taking up the entire table and trying to figure out why they weren't covering it. And, this is an attorney. He's worked in healthcare and he couldn't figure it out. And eventually he just had to send a letter to them being like, what are you guys talking about? We're willing to litigate this. Yeah. I mean, the other key point I just wanted to raise about the ACA and why it's so important to me is it also provides me job freedom and economic freedom, because I work in nonprofits. I've done contract work. I don't always have a full-time job that provides healthcare. I recently took a job working on tornado recovery here in Nashville because there was a devastating tornado back in March. Right. But I don't get health coverage through that job. And so, before the ACA, I was going to plan my life and my career based on health coverage. I was going to go wherever I could go to get a job that would provide health coverage, regardless of whether that was a job I wanted or, job lock. So now, with the ACA, I'm able to do things like take a job helping tornado recovery, helping survivors. Whereas if I didn't have that, the ACA, I would not take that job because I need health insurance. I can't go without it. I can't pay $35,000 a year for my drug, and I need that drug every year.
Thank you, Steve. And we have a great partner in Tennessee Justice Center that we're working with, and hopefully we can get Medicaid expansion past there. But, obviously the ACA continues to be such an important channel of access to healthcare for Tennesseans like yourself. So I'm glad you're able to work a job that really matters to you and where you're doing meaningful work. So important.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to share my story.
No, we thank you. We thank you. Ragan Grossman is joining us from Scottsdale, Arizona. Hi, Ragan.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here today. So the same questions to you. We just like, for you to tell us a bit about yourself and your healthcare journey and what the ACA means to you.
Absolutely. And it's poignant to come after Steve because that's kind of the crux of the whole thing that happened to me in terms of what I could do for a living based on how I could get health insurance. So some people say that I'm a case of really bad timing, but I don't see it that way. My husband and I are planners, and we planned that one day we wanted to own our own business. And that's the American dream, right?
It is.
So after we had our corporate jobs and we planned financially, the whole thing, 2018 was the year. So we did that. We knew that we would be, we had financially planned to carry on to Cobra for about a year. And all systems go. It was, the future looked bright. Then I had some challenges with my vision that was kind of strange, and I'll spare you all of the tests and details. But 2 months before our COBRA ran out, I was diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. It's still new to me and hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, I was dealing with the shock of having a diagnosis with an incurable disease. And even more shocking, it paled in comparison to all of the sudden I had to figure out how I was going to get healthcare coverage.
Right.
And I'm gonna put it out there about my ignorance. I was one of those people that never listened about pre-existing conditions and all these things. It didn't apply to me. I was healthy. you know, of course I was sympathetic to people that struggled with that, but I thought, oh, this doesn't apply to me. And all of a sudden I am staring down the barrel of a gun that will affect the rest of my life. So not one, but two doctors, one at Mayo Clinic, told me that I needed to immediately go back to work for a corporation. And it was that gut wrenching reality of like, I'm gonna have to close a successful business just because of my quality of care. And I refused to do that. So I was so fortunate that I had the Affordable Care Act I could go on the marketplace and I could get insured even with this, you know, horrible disease.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm here probably for two reasons. One, if, you know, I didn't have access to that plan, I feel like in the United States of America, I should not have to do what Steve said and alter my career around where I can get coverage so my future looks bright, because I have the medical care that I need. And the second thing is just what all the storytellers know is the cost of these drugs. I had no idea. So if the ACA gets overturned and I am deemed uninsurable, there's no way I can afford this. And actually, just before this call, I got my next round of medication in this box. Wow. And there are 5 pills in here, 5 pills. My insurance paid $45,000 for 5 pills. That's $9,000 a pill. So for me to sit here and say to people, this is a realization that one day I might have to decide between if I want to keep my house or if I want to keep the ability to walk. And that's a terrifying place to be in, especially in this country.
Absolutely. So I can't imagine your story just kind of, it makes me emotional. I've heard it before, of course, but it's a scary place to be in. And when you think about the American dream and how people chase after that, and then you get the opportunity to have it, and then your whole life is upended, you know, because of a medical diagnosis, and how that just changes your future planning. It's a scary thought. And, you know, and again, like you said, where would you be without the ACA? So what happens? What's going to happen, you know, if you don't have that? And I especially appreciate you because, as you said, this is still very new for you. And I know it's very raw and difficult. That's the mental health aspect of this whole thing, the total health. It's not just healthcare, but it's the total health, you know, dimension of this, that, you know, if you're not well, there's a mental health aspect to it that's very important that is often overlooked. So, yeah, I think you're doing great.
Thank you. And that's what I said from the very beginning is, you know, due to medical advancements, thank goodness we've come a long way and there's disease modifying drugs. But, you know, while I'm still able to talk to you, while I'm still able to sit here and advocate for change, you know, I want to do that while I'm still able to, and hopefully that will be for a long time coming. Assuming that I can get the proper care I need. So
hopefully. And one question for you, Ragan, you mentioned the 5 pills, $9,000 each.
Mm-hmm.
How long are those pills going to last you? How often do you have to take them?
I take them once a day for 5 days, and then I have to have a second round, which is another $45,000 a month later. So I take that, and then I'll go for some MRIs to see if that's working. And in theory, should not have to have more medication for about 11 months. So if you did it on a yearly basis, it's about $90,000
$90,000 a year. Okay, that's what I wanted to get to. Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Mr. Paul Gibbs.
Thank you for my coverage.
Yeah.
And I just can't say enough that if it goes away, where does that leave me? And if it leaves me going back to work and doing something else, you know, I guess that's unfortunate, but.
It is unfortunate. It is.
Really, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say something that I think is really, really crucial. And
Yeah.
from every patient, the stress that we have been under from all of the repeal efforts, it affects our health. Mm-hmm. It affects our health. And listening to Ragan and listening to everyone, I mean, it could, like, the stress alone could literally advance our diseases.
Absolutely.
Just, I neglected to say that during my portion, but I'm so sorry for interrupting.
No, please, listen, this is an open conversation. I would encourage, you know, all of you to jump in with comments or questions of one another. So thank you, Peter, for raising that. It's a very important point for sure. I'm just going to pause really quickly in case there are other reflections before we go on to Paul Gibbs to hear from him. Are there other comments that any of you have or reflections? Okay, well, let's go to Paul Gibbs. Hi, Paul, how are you?
Hi, well, it's hard going last because I'm emotionally overwhelmed by all the amazing stories from all of you. And it's just such an honor to be part of, to be asked by organizations that I respect so much to be here today, and to be here with people that some of you, Peter and Stephanie, I testified to the House Oversight Committee with you last year. So I already feel that bond with you, but I feel a bond now with all of the rest of you. This is a big day, and I'm overwhelmed by the emotion of all of us.
Yeah, completely understandable. And you're with friends, so we're not judging your emotion by any means, Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about where healthcare journeys started. Mine started when I was born, because my twin brother and I were born with severe health issues for both of us. He had an intestinal condition called Hirschsprung's disease. He had 17 surgeries by the time he was just a few years old. I was the relatively healthy one at that time because the kidney condition I was born with, called bilateral ureteral reflux, only required me to have 9 surgeries within the first few years of my life. But yeah, these issues stayed with us and impacted us for all of our lives. And my parents, even with insurance coverage, that led to over $1 million worth of medical bills that they never got back out from under the financial burden of keeping my twin brother and me alive when we were babies. They've passed away within the last 10 years, but they didn't leave a lot materially, but they left just a legacy of love and caring for their family. They were still around in 2008 when I'd been getting sick a lot more than I was used to, but I kept going. At that time, I was working at multiple jobs. I'm an independent filmmaker and in video production. I was also working a lot as an actor at the time, and writer, and all sorts of things which are part of the gig economy. They don't give you health insurance. I was also going to school part-time, and the rest of the time I was a live-in caregiver for my niece and nephew because both of their parents had to work full-time. So I was working. I didn't fit the definition of full-time employment, but I was working very hard all the time. Well, my parents helped me to be able to get some prescriptions I needed at the time. And I saw a doctor maybe a couple of times a year just to maintain those prescriptions. And in the beginning of November of 2008, I went into what I thought was just a totally routine appointment because my old doctor had retired. So I had a new doctor and I needed to keep those prescriptions up. Well, instead, that new doctor told me that my creatinine, which measures the function of your kidney, was so high that I really needed to get a kidney transplant, like right away. It came as a total shock. It was terrifying, and I had no insurance. We were talking about just the surgery for the kidney transplant is $79,000. Now, again, my parents, my church, other people were able to help with some things, but not a $79,000 surgery. I had no idea where the insurance was going to come from. This was right at the time when President Obama was elected, and I was so enthusiastic about healthcare reform that I thought was coming, but I didn't think it was going to come soon enough for me. And I actually had a time when I thought, maybe the best thing I can do is just die for lack of coverage and show people how badly we need this. But I didn't have to die because I fit the qualifications to get Medicare coverage for renal failure. That's a provision that's there for younger people like me at the time. And also I fit the very narrow qualifications for Medicaid, because now I was poor with kidney failure. So now I qualified for Medicaid. So then I also had amazing friends who were willing to be tested to give me a kidney. I had one who gave me a kidney. And I also want to point out, because I hear so many people talking about how, well, we can take care of these things through charity, or people will come forward and help you. Well, excuse me a second. Because of my work as an actor, the Utah theater community was amazingly supportive, and they got together and they raised, working through the most popular theater in the state, and it's one of the most popular of its kind in the country, they raised several $1,000s from me and my donor. My share of that was $10,000. It was amazing, and I'm so grateful for these people. I had the best support system you could possibly get. But guess what? $10,000 doesn't get you a $79,000 surgery.
Yeah.
And my kidneys were so bad that I had to have 2 surgeries. They had to remove my old kidneys 6 weeks before they could put in the new ones. And so I got all of that because of Medicare and Medicaid at the time. But that's one heck of a big pre-existing condition. And without the ACA, I would never have been able to transfer onto private insurance. I did a few years later because of the ACA, but without that private insurance, which I get through my wife's employment because I'm still on a gig economy, without that employment, without that insurance, I wouldn't be able to, I couldn't stay alive. Now, my medications aren't as expensive as Ragan's, but every month, every day, I have to take several medications just to keep my transplanted kidney, my body from rejecting the transplanted kidney. Now, if I don't take those for like 3 days in a row, my kidney's gone. Now, just the basic single #1 immunosuppressant, and I take 3 immunosuppressants and several other medications related to the transplant or to other conditions that are related to the transplant. Just the main one costs more per month than my mortgage. A few years after this, they discovered that a lot of this may have been caused by chronically distended bladder. And because of that, I've discovered since then, I have to use one of these catheters about 5 times a day to empty my bladder. And that costs several hundred, a few $100s a month just to get that. So without the ACA, I might not be able to afford to urinate.
Yeah.
Now, this is really personal and used to be hard for me to talk to. I used to be embarrassed about it. But during the repeal attempts in 2017, I decided there's no reason for me to be embarrassed about. The people who are trying to take this away from me should be embarrassed.
That's right.
Now, because of this coverage, I managed to survive, get married, have a wonderful wife, and 2 of the most adorable little boys. you could ever imagine, I love my children so much. Without the ACA, they wouldn't have had a chance to be born because I wouldn't be here. And through all this process, I feel like I'm having to constantly justify mine and my children's lives. And I don't know, people could argue whether my life matters, but I know my sons' lives matter. They deserve a chance to live. And that's what the ACA is to them. Both of them were born with kidney conditions.
Right.
My younger son, Peter, had to have a surgery when he was 4 months old, just a couple of weeks before I went and testified to the House committee. And without the ACA, that baby who's about to turn 2 next February could be uninsurable for his entire life because of a condition he was born with. And that is wrong. And trying to take that insurance away from us is wrong. And that's what I want to say. That's what I want people to understand is we've explored every avenue. How can we not explore every other avenue for insurance when it's our lives we're talking about? Without the ACA, we can't make it. I know I've heard so many opponents. Every Republican member of that House committee said, Jim Jordan, who was the ranking member, said, everybody here wants to protect pre-existing conditions. Well, I've heard that over and over again, but there are mechanisms within the ACA to protect those conditions. It's not something you can just say they're protected, like President Trump did with his executive order. It doesn't work that way. It's harder than that. Multiple provisions make it possible. I've heard the plans they presented in 2017. They did not protect pre-existing conditions the way the ACA does. They've talked about doing things like putting us on expensive high-risk pools. Mm-hmm. That's not protection for pre-existing condition. They've talked about shutouts for small lapses in coverage. That is not protection for pre-existing conditions. And along with this, because this affected me so personally, I like Peter, have really devoted so much time to activism. I spent 6 years fighting to expand Medicaid here in Utah, and we finally got it through a ballot initiative because our legislature wouldn't do it. I've met hundreds of people in my state and other states who can't get by without that Medicaid expansion. They're all hardworking people. None of the stereotypes about these people are true. And they could all lose coverage during a global pandemic.
Yeah.
If this is taken away, I just want people to understand that political differences, political spite has no place in deciding people's lives. Our lives are on the line. This isn't something lesser than that, and that's what we're fighting for. And I've gone long. I can be long-winded about that, and I apologize, but obviously this means everything to me. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for giving me a chance to talk. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. Paul, wow, first of all, you have no need to apologize for anything. And I want to let you know your life indeed does matter. This is not about politics. This is about people. And literally, this is about life and death for so many people. People's lives could be hanging in the balance without the ACA. It's access to life-saving drugs and treatments. You each have a story about that. It's access to expert medical teams, all of these dimensions. And, I guess I would ask, first of all, I want to pause and just see if there are any reactions or comments to not only Paul's story, but any of the stories you've heard today. I want to give you that space just to reflect and talk with one another. Go ahead, Peter.
I just want to say, my job, quote unquote, to, when I go to DC is to, you know, remain objective, because what I do is I take the stories, like a story like Paul or Stephanie or Stephen or Savanna or Ragan, and I go into the district or the U.S. Senator, and I sit down and I speak with them. And there are a lot of times, unfortunately, they're all GOP offices where I have to bite my tongue. And the only time I stepped out of character, out of my patient advocacy role, is when we're referred to as data. And you know what? Look at me. I am not a fact and a figure. I am a living human, breathing, I'm a person, and the rhetoric is that, you know, the numbers and this and that, and I don't want to pontificate on that, but the important thing is that we must keep telling these stories. We must keep sharing these stories, because we are the only things that put a human face to a repeal. And, you know, I hear from people that, you know, if they live in a red state or district, you know, their story doesn't matter to the representative, or if they live in a blue state or district, that it doesn't matter because their representative agrees with them. But I just want to say, it doesn't matter what state or district you live in. They are informed by us. And if you don't inform them, then they don't know it's an issue. So thank you, and bravo. And Paul, you know, I love you, and you have a bond for life. And I'm just so grateful to each and every one of you, because I know this is not an easy thing that we do. I know it's difficult, and it never gets easy for me to say that my disease would progress and I would die. And that's not an easy thing to say, but it's an important thing to say. So thank you, everyone.
Love you,
Well
Peter.
said. Well said. I guess as we move to close, I have a final question for each of you, or as many of you as would want to answer. And it's a two-part question, which is just to kind of pick up on what Peter just said. Why is it important for you individually to advocate and share your stories? And what would you say to the Supreme Court justices about protecting the ACA if you had the opportunity? Does anyone want to take that first?
Sure, I'll jump on in there.
Thank you.
You know, for me, it's very important for a number of reasons, because initially, I didn't think that I mattered because it was just me. So it was just like, well, if this just affects my family, nobody cares really. But it's not just me. You know, all of us here from different places are having similar stories, and we all have different issues. And so unless people will share their stories, other people feel like they're alone. You know, and there's strength in hearing that from other people, hearing that, you know, I'm not the only person going through something. And I live in an extremely red state. I mean, Missouri is about as red as you can get.
Indeed it is.
And so it's not popular. It's not a popular thing here to advocate for the Affordable Care Act. But it's important because even though we're a red state, a lot of the people who are voting red are people who need the protections, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me why, but you know, everybody's entitled to their vote and their opinion. But, you know, for the members of the Supreme Court, you know, I understand that they've got a lifetime appointment. The rest of us are out here on a rotation, and they've got the insurance. They're going to have it for the rest of their lives. It's not real to them like that. But everybody in their life is not as privileged. And they've got to think like those of us that don't always have that privilege. And, you know, maybe some of them were independently wealthy going through law school and everything else. But if they weren't, they need to remember back to the times when they were law students, where, you know, you're sharing a peanut butter sandwich with a classmate, and because everybody's broke, you know, students just a fancy word for impoverished. But they need to remember a time when they were vulnerable. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we can get up on our high horse and we can not, it's not that we don't care, but it's that you forget and you stop thinking about that. Mm-hmm. And you've got to be humbled. You've got to remember a time when you didn't have everything that you have now. You remember that journey that you took before you got there. You know, this wasn't something that was promised to them from birth. There are, you know, a lot of them come from different backgrounds, but for those that, you know, started off just normal people, remember that. Remember your family. Remember all of the people. Remember your kids and your grandkids, because anybody can get sick. That's right. Illness has no discriminators. We can all get it. we can all just wake up one day and one of our organs stop functioning. I didn't have kidney problems before, but diabetes affected my kidneys. I got stones. Yeah. And, you know, diseases are progressive. And now, as we've seen with COVID touches everything. Yeah. Every socioeconomic status. Dr. Ben Carson has it.
That's right.
Famous, brilliant neurosurgeon has it. And it's something that, you know, all of us are having to, every family has been affected in some way or another. And it could very well be a pre-existing condition. And we have no idea right now the long-term effects of it.
That's right.
And so before you think of stripping or even tampering with a precedent, which is very important to the Supreme Court. As a lawyer, that's the first thing you learn in law school. Precedent. This is the law, and it has been the law. And each time they keep coming back to repeal this, we're spending more money in litigation of the ACA than it probably cost. But remember that this is precedent. This is the law. What they do affects everyone for years to come. And they just need to hold on to that, you know, these protections have been upheld for a reason. And before you decide to try to change precedent in the middle of a pandemic, think about the effect that this precedent has going forward for years to come. Because this is going to be our court, probably the rest of my legal career. This is going to be our court through our children's adulthood.
Right.
So they have to think about that. And I think that they will. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion for King v. Burwell. I don't foresee him changing course on it now because they have a conservative majority. I still trust in the fact that these judges are lawyers and they will remember and uphold the law.
From your lips to God's ears, Stephanie, for sure. Any other closing thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yes, why it's important for us to be advocates. When I went through my transplant experience, I kept thinking, and when I discovered I would get the coverage I needed and I had a kidney donor, I kept thinking, there are so many other people who don't get this. Why do I get it and they don't?
Yeah. I
haven't ever met a person who doesn't deserve to live. Some of you may notice that my virtual background is the Bat Cave. Batman is my activist alter ego because he's all about using his own pain and fear to stop others from going through what he did. And that's why I'm an activist, is because I've been there. I have that pain and fear that will always be with me, and I'm going to use it for good. And what I tell the Supreme Court justices is I show them my 2 children and tell them, I just want to live to see them grow up. And I am not special. I'm not different from anybody else who needs this. And there are millions in this position, and we need you. We need you to act with compassion.
Beautifully said, Paul. Beautifully said. The floor is open if any of you would like to answer that 2-part question, and then we'll wrap up.
I just want to say, you know, what we need to understand too is, you know, change isn't going to happen for as I've stated previously, and it cannot be, you know, stated enough, is that everybody with a chronic illness, or anybody who is a caregiver of somebody with a chronic illness, needs to speak up and needs to share their stories. But the other thing as well is in states like Texas and Florida, where there are you know, millions of people that are affected by healthcare. And they depend on the ACA, they depend on Medicare, they depend on Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
We need to educate them on the fact that they are voting for leaders that want to take that away from them. And we need to figure out a better way to engage them, because if they truly knew that, I think there would, I don't know if everybody would vote differently, but I know they might think differently about them. And I think that's something that we need to think going forward.
I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think what we miss oftentimes in this argument and this battle, this very partisan laced battle for healthcare, is that, again, this is not politics, it's about people. And as Paul said, you know, everyone has a right to live, and, you know, none of us are really special. We all want that same opportunity. And so finding a way to connect on our shared values, because healthcare is such an emotional thing for everyone on all sides, right? And so Peter, I couldn't agree with you more. We have to find a way to make those bridges and connections. And I think it's starting with our shared values, which is healthcare. You know, everyone wants it. Everyone wants it. So we shouldn't be attaching, you know, political games to it.
And everyone needs it.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
That's why I think I've decided to, you know, come and be an advocate for that, is to get people on board that are not directly affected. You know, we are preaching to the choir. We all have a dog in this race, and it's really important that we get covered personally. But the key is going to be to get someone else who has a group insurance plan through a company that does, you know, that doesn't have a pre-existing condition. They're very healthy. And the reason I'm here today is because that was me less than a year ago. It was a fleeting thing about pre-existing conditions, those types of things. So it's really important that people know. And I think Stephanie used the right word when she said vulnerable. You know, I'm a planner and I save and I've got my life in order, and these bad things can't happen to me because I'm going to keep it all in check. But I am vulnerable, just like everyone else. It doesn't matter my sex, my race, my socioeconomic status. My walls will cave in if I don't have the Affordable Care Act, just like anyone else's will, because of the choices that I've made and because of an illness I've been diagnosed with that was out of my control. So I think Peter's right, just getting other people on board. That's why I'm here today. And that's why I would want people to know, it's not about me, it's about the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Ragan. Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
For me, I advocate because I live in Texas, and I feel like I can have the conversations needed to convince Republican lawmakers, because I'm not really one to back down. And so I feel like I can definitely like go and talk to like people like John Cornyn and say, here's what's wrong. Here is how I think that this can benefit you politically. It can benefit patients as well. And here's how to do it. And I'll support you in that. In things like patent thicketing, he has a bill that I think was just passed, that I spoke at a roundtable for him, and we spoke at length about it too. And he seems to actually care, but like trying to get him behind like everything I would like him to. It's a process, but I feel like I'm making a really big difference in talking to him, and also like Kevin Brady, not so much Ted Cruz, but like I'm able to kind of go in there, give them my piece, and show them like, I know what I'm talking about. Here's what you need to know about this. And it's really something that I'm like called to do, I feel like. And it also gives me a lot of power back, that I feel like I lose being sick. And so that's a big one for me, on why I advocate. And then for like what I would say to the Supreme Court, honestly, I would probably use some fear tactics. I think fear is a pretty good motivator, in giving them a reality check of, like Ragan was saying, this can happen to you at literally any time.
Anytime.
Like, I got arthritis at 14. Like, that doesn't happen in other people's minds, but it can literally happen to you at any age. And here's how it affects me and how it can affect you. I pay, or my list price of all my drugs is reaching $200,000 a year. So like, everything is so ridiculous, and it can happen to you at any time. So, you know, if you need to think selfishly about this, I will help you think selfishly.
Savannah, you're amazing.
Thanks.
Continue to share your story and don't back down. You're a woman after my own heart. I love it. Indeed. Any other closing thoughts before we?
Yeah, I'll jump in just real quick.
Yes, Steve.
You know, so I'm an advocate, like others have said. I mean, number one, selfishly for myself, because I need this. If I don't have the ACA, I don't know what my life is going to be like. And then number two, of course, for the millions and millions of other Americans that are just like me, and that will also, you know, who knows what their lives will be without the ACA. And for those who, you know, aren't as lucky and you know, who their parents are and don't have an attorney that can advocate for them with, you know, insurance companies when they get denials. You know, and for the millions and millions of Americans that get denials, you know, even with the protections of the ACA, this is still happening. And, you know, we hear that a lot of these things, you know, it takes reporters. I think NPR has a bill of the month story, you know, where they talk about, you know, whatever bill it was this month that was just utterly insane and, you know, was denied by health insurance. So this happens to everyone, and it's something that we need to keep the pressure on. And then, you know, in terms of what I would say to the Supreme Court justices, you know, for me, this is about the American dream, like we've heard about it, you know, like our ability as, you know, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you know, that is foundational ideal and bedrock of America. And in today's day and age, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means access to healthcare. affordable access to quality healthcare, because you can't have life, liberty, or happiness without those. And so I've never understood the opposition, because for me, this is about personal freedom. It's about that foundational American dream, and about, you know, things that are enshrined in both our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. So, you know, it's just, it's so important. And I think that, I hope that the justices will see that this is about personal liberty. This is about, you know, our rights as Americans.
Oh, wow. I love that. And that goes back to the point I was making about the shared values and bridging those connections. That was wonderful, Steve. Thank you so much. I see that Ragan has lost audio, so she may have dropped off or whatever, but just wanted to say, are there any other comments or even questions for any partners that are on the line? I can't really see if we have any, but in case we have any partners who are on and have questions of you, if not, we can wrap up. This has been such an incredible conversation. It's always so good to hear stories like these, because they do keep us humble. Hey, Ragan, they do keep us humble, and they force us to remember. As Stephanie said, you know, we can't forget, and any of us could be vulnerable at any time to being sick and losing our power. But I love what Savanna said about her advocacy and sharing her story are ways to take that power back. I just think you're all so incredibly brave and, you know, strong and really super amazing. I really mean that. Hey, Ragan, I see you have audio back. Did you have any final thoughts? No, that's okay.
I was troubleshooting, and my IT department came in, which is my husband.
Thank you, husband.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you had any final comments. It's okay if you don't. If not, we'll just, okay.
Thank
you. Okay, yeah, no problem. Well, everyone, we've reached the end of our time together. This has been so great. On behalf of everyone at Panelists USA, our executive director, Frederick Isasi, entire staff and our leadership team and our board, a tremendous thanks to Peter, Savanna, Stephanie, Paul, Steve, and Ragan for your advocacy, for your vulnerability, and just for lending your voice and story to protect and expand the ACA. I really feel like thank you is so insufficient, but please know how grateful we are for each of you and your partnership with us. A special thanks to our friends at NHeLP, the National Health Law Program, for making all of this happen today. This has been weeks in the making, from our press briefing to this conversation with Storytellers. So thank you to Elizabeth, Andy, and Daryl. We appreciate you. And thanks to all of you who are listening in. I hope you will keep in touch with us. And while this marks the end of our conversation with our storytellers, this is not the end of our activities today. We'll be on Twitter and Facebook all day long, sharing content about the importance of protecting and expanding the ACA. And we, Panelists USA, is co-hosting a Twitter storm just in 15 minutes at 2 p.m. Eastern with our friends at Community Catalyst and other groups in the healthcare, progressive healthcare space, using the hashtag #NeedMyACA. So again, that's at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can find the details on the Panelists USA Twitter page. That's at Panelists USA. Please join us in using that hashtag, even up until we get a ruling from SCOTUS next spring or summer. Need my ACA. Until next time, thank you, and please take good care of yourselves. Bye, everybody.